A man and his sister, fresh off a long journey, were excited as they pulled into their new neighborhood. It was peaceful and quiet, a place that seemed to offer the fresh start they had been longing for. The streets were lined with well-kept houses, and the sound of birds chirping made it feel like the perfect place to settle down. They had spent months searching for the right home, and now they had finally found it. The sister, in her mid-30s, was thrilled to be in a new town. It was a chance to leave behind the hustle of the city and embrace a quieter, simpler life. She was already thinking of ways to get involved in the community. Her brother, a few years older, shared her excitement but had a more cautious approach. He wanted to make sure everything was just right before they fully settled in. Their new house had a cozy, inviting feel. It was a modest two-story, with a small front porch and a neat little garden in the front. For the sister, who had been using a wheelchair for the past few years, this was a dream come true. The house had been specifically chosen for its accessibility. The wide doorways and spacious hallways made moving around much easier. The brother was more than happy to help her make any adjustments she needed to make the house even more comfortable. They had also installed a wheelchair ramp at the front of the house, ensuring she could easily get in and out of the house whenever she wanted. The ramp was simple but sturdy, made of wood with a smooth surface that allowed her to move up and down without any difficulty. It was a small modification, but to the sister, it meant a lot. It was a sign of independence, of being able to live life on her terms. The first few days in the neighborhood were perfect. They spent their time unpacking, meeting the neighbors, and getting familiar with the area. Everyone seemed friendly enough, although the sister couldn't help but notice the strange looks they occasionally received. She brushed it off, thinking it was just her imagination. But as time passed, she began to sense something was off. It was one afternoon, just a few days after they had finished moving in, that the trouble began. The wife, who had been helping with the settling-in process, was at home when there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find two members of the Homeowners Association, or HOA. The men were well-dressed, their faces cold and formal. They introduced themselves with stiff smiles, then immediately got to the point. "We've come to inform you that the wheelchair ramp at the front of the house needs to be removed," one of the men said. The wife was stunned. She wasn't sure if she had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Why? It's a necessary addition for my sister." The man cleared his throat and glanced at his colleague before speaking again. "It doesn't comply with community guidelines. It's against the HOA's rules to have any modifications to the property without prior approval. We understand your situation, but this ramp has to go." The wife's heart sank. She tried to stay calm, but the frustration bubbled up inside her. "This ramp is a necessity. My sister can't get in and out of the house without it. It's not just some decoration. It's part of our home's accessibility." The other man stepped forward slightly. "We understand your concerns, but the rules are the rules. It's a community issue. You'll need to remove the ramp immediately." The wife felt the blood rush to her face. How could they be so heartless? How could they force her sister to lose the one thing that made her feel independent? "But why?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Why does it need to be removed? There's nothing wrong with it." The men exchanged a quick glance. The first one spoke again, but his tone was less sympathetic. "I'm sorry, but we can't make exceptions. The HOA's policies are clear. There are no modifications allowed without approval." The wife's mind was racing. This didn't make sense. The ramp wasn't in anyone's way, and it wasn't causing any issues. The neighborhood was peaceful, with no signs of complaints from anyone. Why were they suddenly being asked to tear it down? "I'll need to speak to my husband about this," the wife said, her voice sharp now. The men nodded, but their faces didn't soften. They handed her a piece of paper with a written notice, outlining the violation, and turned to leave. As they walked away, the wife felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Her sister, who had already faced so many challenges in life, was now being targeted by the very community they had hoped would be a safe haven. She knew this wasn't just about the ramp. Something else was going on. Later that evening, The wife spoke to her sister, explaining the situation. The sister was equally shocked and upset. "What do they want me to do?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "I can't go without the ramp. It's the only way for me to get out of the house. This isn't right." The wife nodded, trying to comfort her. "I know, but I don't understand why the HOA would do this. It's not like we've done anything wrong. The ramp doesn't harm anyone, and it's clearly needed. I'm going to find out more about this. I'll talk to them again." But even as she spoke, the wife couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this situation than just a rule enforcement. The way the men had acted, the coldness in their voices, it was as if they had been waiting for an excuse to target them. The next morning, the wife called the HOA office. She spoke to a woman on the phone, hoping for some kind of explanation. The woman, however, was no more helpful than the men who had come to the house. "I'm afraid the ramp is a violation of HOA guidelines," she said, her voice flat and unfeeling. "There's nothing we can do about it." The wife tried to reason with her, asking for more details, but the woman remained unhelpful. "This isn't just about a ramp," the wife thought as she hung up the phone. "There's something going on here. Why target us?" As the days passed, the wife couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pushed into a corner. She was determined to fight for her sister's right to have a wheelchair ramp, but there was something more to this conflict. The HOA's actions didn't seem random. Something was off. Little did she know, the conflict was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would reveal a shocking truth about her sister's power and influence in the community. But for now, the wife knew that things were about to get much more complicated. The next morning, the wife couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to the HOA's actions than just a simple rule enforcement. It didn't make sense. The ramp was clearly necessary, not only for her sister's mobility but also for her dignity. They had followed all the right procedures, and yet, they were being told to tear it down. The wife decided that she wasn't going to let this go easily. She was determined to find out why the HOA had chosen to pick on them. After a restless night, she called the HOA office again, this time hoping to get a clearer explanation. The phone rang, and after a few moments, a woman answered. "Hello, this is Jennifer from the HOA office. How can I assist you today?" "Hi, Jennifer," the wife said, her voice tight with frustration. "I'm calling about the notice you sent regarding my sister's wheelchair ramp. We've followed the guidelines, but we're being told to remove it. I need to know why." There was a brief silence on the other end before Jennifer responded. "I understand your concern, but as mentioned, the ramp doesn't comply with our community standards. I've already explained this." "No, you haven't," the wife cut in. "You haven't given me a reason why. The ramp isn't hurting anyone. It's not blocking any driveways, and it's not causing any harm to the community." The woman on the other end sighed, as if tired of the conversation. "The ramp doesn't fit with the aesthetic of the neighborhood," Jennifer said flatly. "It's against the HOA's rules, and there's nothing we can do about it. I'm sorry, but this is final." "What do you mean, it doesn't fit the aesthetic?" The wife was taken aback. This was the first time she had heard that reasoning. "This isn't about aesthetics. It's about accessibility. My sister can't even get into the house without that ramp." "I understand that," Jennifer replied. "But the HOA has rules, and those rules must be followed. There's nothing more to discuss." "But," the wife's voice shook with frustration. "This is ridiculous. It's not like we've put up a massive eyesore. This is a functional, necessary ramp. You can't just demand it be torn down for some aesthetic reason." She felt her anger rising, but she knew she needed to stay calm. "I want to speak to someone higher up. Someone who can actually make a decision here." There was a long pause, and when Jennifer spoke again, her tone was colder than before. "I'll let you talk to someone, but I don't think it will change anything." The wife knew she had to push forward. She couldn't back down now. She couldn't let her sister suffer just because of a petty HOA rule that made no sense. A few hours later, the wife found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the phone. She had managed to get the contact details for the HOA president, a man named Richard. According to the paperwork she had received, Richard was the one who made the final decisions when it came to disputes like this. The wife dialed his number, her heart pounding in her chest. After a few rings, a deep voice answered. Richard Allen speaking. "Hi, Mr. Allen," the wife began, trying to keep her voice steady. "My name is Sarah, and I'm calling about a notice I received from the HOA. My sister and I live at 217 Maple Lane, and we've been told to remove my sister's wheelchair ramp. I'm not sure why this is happening, and I need some clarification." "Ah, yes," Richard replied, his tone businesslike. "I'm aware of the situation. The ramp doesn't comply with the HOA's design standards, and that's the end of the matter. You've been given the notice, and you'll need to make the necessary changes." "But it's a wheelchair ramp," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's not a decoration. It's essential for my sister to move in and out of the house. Why is it being treated like this?" Richard was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was dismissive. "I understand that it's necessary for your sister, but it still doesn't fit the community guidelines. I'm afraid there's nothing more to discuss. The ramp must be removed, or further action will be taken." Sarah's frustration boiled over. She clenched her fists, trying to keep herself composed. "This isn't just about aesthetics. It's about accessibility for my sister. You're telling me that your guidelines are more important than her ability to get in and out of the house? Is that really what you're saying?" Richard's response was cold and unfeeling. "Rules are rules. They apply to everyone." The line went silent for a few seconds. The wife felt her blood pressure rising. How could this man be so indifferent? "I'm sorry," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "But this isn't just a rule. It's my sister's life. You can't just tell us to remove something that helps her function on a daily basis." "That's the policy," Richard replied. "I'm afraid you'll need to follow it." The conversation ended shortly after that, with no resolution in sight. Sarah stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone, her heart heavy. She had expected resistance, but this was something else. The HOA was standing firm on a rule that made no sense at all. She glanced at her sister, who had been listening quietly from the other room. The sister was visibly upset, her face pale and tense. "What now?" she asked softly. Sarah sat down beside her, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "I don't know," she replied, her voice tight. "But I'm not going to let them get away with this. We need to do something about it. I'll figure it out, I promise." Sarah had no idea what steps to take next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let the HOA get away with bullying her sister. She wasn't going to back down, no matter how difficult the fight would be. She was determined to stand up for her sister and make sure the ramp stayed where it belonged. The wife couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The HOA's refusal to back down, the coldness in their voices, it didn't sit right with her. She had spent hours thinking about their conversation, replaying Richard's words in her head. "Rules are rules," he had said. But as the days went by, the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was something much bigger at play here. It wasn't just a simple case of an unreasonable HOA. There was something personal in it, something that felt more deliberate. And then, late one evening, as she sat with her sister, trying to find a solution, the truth came out. "There's something I haven't told you," her sister said, breaking the silence. The wife turned to her, surprised. Her sister, usually open and honest, had been quiet ever since the HOA had gotten involved. "What do you mean?" the wife asked, her curiosity piqued. Her sister hesitated, as though weighing the decision to reveal something important. I didn't want to tell you yet," she began, her voice low. "But I think it's time you knew." The wife's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" Her sister looked at her for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "I'm not just some random person in this neighborhood. I'm the governor." The words hung in the air, and the wife couldn't process them for a moment. "What? You're the governor?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The sister nodded, her expression serious. "Yes, I've been the governor for 2 years now, and I have more control over things than I've let on. The wife felt her world tilt slightly. This revelation turned everything upside down. She had always known that her sister was powerful, but this? She had no idea her sister had such a high-profile position. The wife sat back in her chair, trying to process the news. So, what does this mean for the ramp? She asked. Her sister leaned forward, her gaze steady and resolute. It means that the HOA has no idea who they're dealing with. I control the state's funding. And that includes funding for the HOA. The wife blinked in disbelief. Wait a minute, she said, her mind working to catch up. Are you saying you control the funds that keep the HOA running? The sister nodded. Exactly. I have the power to cut off their funding. They don't know it yet, but they've just made a huge mistake by messing with me. The wife stared at her sister, astonished. But, why didn't you tell me this before? She asked, her voice a mix of confusion and admiration. I didn't want to use my position to make things easier, her sister explained. I didn't want anyone to think I was abusing my power. But now? They've gone too far. I'm not going to let them treat us like this, especially when they're targeting something so personal to you. The wife felt a rush of emotion. She had always admired her sister's strength, but now, hearing the truth, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her sister wasn't just fighting for her. She was ready to use her position to make things right. So, what do we do now? The wife asked, her voice steadying. We're going to make them regret this, her sister replied, determination in her eyes. I'm going to take action, and I'm going to make sure they know that messing with us isn't going to be easy. They've crossed the line, and now they'll pay the price. The wife nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. I'm with you. Whatever we need to do, we'll do it. As they sat there, discussing the next steps, the wife couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. They weren't just victims in this situation. They were about to take control. The power had shifted, and the wife now realized that the HOA had underestimated them in the worst way. Her sister wasn't just the governor. She was someone who could make things happen, who had the ability to turn the tables. The wife knew that whatever came next, they were going to make sure the HOA felt the full weight of their mistake. And she was ready to fight alongside her sister every step of the way. The days following the revelation of her sister's position as governor were a blur of activity. But despite the urgency of the situation, the wife noticed a strange sense of calm settling over her sister. It was as if the weight of the HOA's unjust decision had been lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. The wife couldn't help but marvel at her sister's composure. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically, and now her sister seemed more determined than ever to make the HOA regret their actions. Yet, despite the brewing storm, her sister remained outwardly calm. She wasn't rushing into action. Instead, she was taking her time, gathering the necessary information, and planning her next move carefully. The wife, who had always been the more impulsive one, found herself leaning into her sister's calm approach. It was clear that her sister was no stranger to navigating complicated situations. She had held political office for years, and now, that experience was going to be crucial in dealing with the HOA. Every conversation they had about the situation was strategic. The sister wasn't making rash decisions. She was thinking about the long-term consequences of every move they made. We need to make sure we've got all our facts straight, her sister said one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of her. I want to know exactly how the HOA has been operating, what their funding looks like, and who their supporters are. We're not going in blind. The wife nodded, impressed by her sister's methodical approach. And how do we get all this information? She asked. We're going to have to dig, her sister replied. There are always records, even if they don't want to make them public. I know people in the right places who can help us access them. The wife's mind raced as she thought about what this would mean. It wasn't just about fixing the ramp. It was about taking down a system that had abused its power. But what if the HOA fought back harder than they expected? What if their political connections reached farther than her sister's? Do you think the HOA will back down once they know who you are? The wife asked, her voice filled with doubt. Her sister paused for a moment, looking at her with a calm expression. "I don't know," she said finally. "But I do know that I've got the power to make them listen. I'm not going to let them run over us like this. I won't give them a choice but to fix this situation." The wife felt a shiver run down her spine. Her sister wasn't just talking about a small battle over a ramp anymore. This was bigger than that. The calm before the storm was tangible now. The wife felt like they were on the verge of something major, something that would change not just their own lives, but possibly the way the HOA operated in the future. There was so much at stake. "What happens if they don't back down?" the wife asked. "Then we take it further," her sister replied, her voice steely. "I'm going to make sure this gets the attention it deserves. If the HOA doesn't want to cooperate, they'll face the consequences. We'll take it to the public, to the media, to anyone who will listen." The wife was stunned by her sister's confidence. She had always known her sister to be a strong woman, but this was something different. She wasn't just fighting for herself or for her sister. She was fighting for justice. "How do we get the word out?" the wife asked. Her sister smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "I have a few connections. I'll make some calls, get the ball rolling. Trust me, once this hits the public, the HOA won't be able to ignore us." Over the next few days, the wife watched as her sister quietly prepared, setting the wheels in motion. They gathered more information, reached out to allies, and built their case against the HOA. The wife couldn't help but feel both nervous and excited. She had always been the one to act first, but now, she was learning to trust her sister's judgment. Her sister had a plan, and it was one that would hit the HOA where it hurt, where the HOA's influence came from, their funding. As the days passed, the wife began to notice a shift in the way she looked at her sister. She wasn't just a governor anymore. She was someone who could take on the system and win. The wife knew it wouldn't be easy. The HOA wasn't going to go down without a fight. But for the first time since the incident with the ramp, she felt a sense of hope. They weren't just reacting to the HOA's actions. They were taking control. This was going to be a fight for fairness, and her sister was ready to lead the charge. The calm before the storm had passed, and now, it was time for action. The wife stood beside her sister, fully committed to whatever came next. They weren't just going to get the ramp back. They were going to take down the HOA's stranglehold on the neighborhood, once and for all. The storm was coming, and they were ready to face it head-on. The morning after the wife and her sister had discussed their plans, the tension in the air was palpable. The wife could feel the anticipation building as they prepared for the first big step. Her sister, calm as ever, was getting ready to visit the HOA office. She had made it clear that she wasn't going in with threats or complaints. She was going in to fix this the right way. The wife, still processing how quickly things were escalating, couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had never seen her sister this focused. And while she trusted her completely, she still couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to walk into something much bigger than they expected. "Are you sure about this?" the wife asked, glancing at her sister as they gathered their things. "I mean, they don't know who you are yet. They could react in ways we don't expect." Her sister smiled, a glint of confidence in her eyes. "I'm sure. They've made their move. Now it's my turn to make mine. We'll handle this, but I'm going in calm. There's no need to start a fire when we can simply put it out." The wife nodded, but she couldn't help feeling a mix of awe and concern. Her sister's resolve was impressive, but she knew the HOA was not going to back down easily. They were about to find out just how much power her sister truly had. When they arrived at the HOA office, it was clear from the start that they weren't expecting anyone like her. The office was small, filled with beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. The staff inside, mostly middle-aged men and women who had grown accustomed to dealing with minor neighborhood complaints, didn't bat an eye when the wife and her sister walked in. They went about their business, pretending not to notice. But when her sister approached the front desk, things immediately shifted. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with short brown hair, barely looked up as she asked, "How can I help you?" "I'd like to speak to Richard Allen, please," the sister said calmly, her voice unwavering. The receptionist paused, her eyes flicking up to assess the newcomers, but she didn't recognize them. "May I ask who's calling?" "Governor Erica Daniels," the sister replied, her tone simple but strong. There was an immediate change in the air. The receptionist's expression faltered for just a second before she quickly regained composure. "Excuse me?" she asked, now more attentive. "Governor Erica Daniels. I need to speak to Richard Allen." The wife could see the receptionist's hands shake slightly as she picked up the phone and dialed the office of the HOA president. Within moments, Richard Allen emerged from the back office. He was a tall, imposing man in his mid-40s, with neatly combed dark hair and a well-maintained suit. He had the air of someone used to being in control. When he spotted the sister standing in the lobby, however, his face changed. The wife could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, followed by a flash of unease. "Governor Daniels," he said, his voice tight. "What brings you here today?" Her sister smiled slightly, her composure never wavering. "I'm here about the wheelchair ramp at my sister's house." Richard Allen's eyes narrowed. "I'm afraid there's not much to discuss. We've already made our position clear on that." "Oh, I think there is much to discuss," her sister replied smoothly, her voice calm yet commanding. "You see, I've been made aware that the ramp is in violation of the community's guidelines. But I also control the state's funding, including the funds that the HOA relies on. And, unfortunately, you've just made a costly mistake by refusing to comply with basic fairness." Richard's expression faltered. The wife watched as the tension in the room thickened. This wasn't just a simple HOA matter anymore. Her sister had just laid the groundwork for a confrontation that would shake things to their core. "Governor, I didn't realize," Richard began, but her sister cut him off with a raised hand. "No, Richard. You didn't realize. You didn't realize that I hold the power to change things, not just for my sister, but for every single one of your residents. And you certainly didn't realize that the funding you rely on can be cut off at a moment's notice." Richard blinked, his face draining of color as the implications of her words sank in. "That's not necessary," he stammered, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "We were just following protocol. There's no need for such drastic measures." "Drastic measures?" her sister asked, a smile creeping onto her face, though her tone was anything but friendly. "I think you've misjudged the situation, Richard. This isn't about protocol. This is about a blatant violation of basic rights. You've targeted my sister for no reason other than your rigid rules, and now you will answer for it." The room fell silent. The wife stood to the side, her heart racing as she watched the exchange. This was no longer about a simple ramp. This was about power, control, and justice. The tables had turned, and now it was the HOA that had to answer for its actions. Richard stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing as he tried to assess the gravity of the situation. He cleared his throat before speaking again, his voice quieter. "I understand, Governor. We'll handle this situation immediately. I'll have the ramp reinstated, and will ensure no further issues arise." Her sister didn't move, her gaze steady. "That's a good start," she said coldly. "But there's more to this. I expect a full review of your policies and a public apology to my sister. You've damaged the trust this community once had in the HOA, and now it's time to restore it. If you fail to do this, we'll go public, and I won't hesitate to take further action." Richard's face tightened, but he nodded, realizing that he was in no position to argue. "Of course, Governor," he said, his voice forced. "We'll do whatever is necessary." "Good," her sister replied, her tone now final. "Make sure you keep your word." As they left the office, the wife couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. Her sister had walked into that room with nothing but quiet determination and had walked out with the power to bring down the very people who had tried to hurt her. The first battle was won, but the war wasn't over yet. The wife felt the excitement building inside her. This was just the beginning. The following day, the wife couldn't help but replay the conversation in her mind. Her sister's calm composure had left her feeling both awe and anxiety. The power her sister wielded had been undeniable, but the wife couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The HOA had backed down, for now, but the wife knew they wouldn't give up easily. There was more to this fight than they understood. Her sister seemed more relaxed after the meeting, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew she had the power to control the situation, but what would it take to truly get the HOA to comply? "What's next?" the wife asked, sitting across from her sister at the kitchen table, watching as she calmly sipped her coffee. "We've made the first move, but this is far from over, right?" Her sister set the cup down slowly, looking at her with a slight smile. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "But we've put them on notice. The real work starts now. We need to dig deeper into their finances, find their weak points, and hit them where it hurts. It's not just about fixing the ramp. It's about making sure they never mess with us again." The wife nodded, still processing everything. Her sister wasn't just reacting to the HOA's actions. She was playing a long game, making strategic moves to expose their corruption. But as they discussed their next steps, something inside the wife clicked. Her sister's calm demeanor wasn't just about being composed. It was a shield. The wife had seen the anger that burned underneath, but it was being used carefully, controlled. And that was what made her sister so dangerous to the HOA. Later that afternoon, they received an unexpected phone call. It was from Richard Allen, the HOA president. The wife felt a flash of irritation at the sound of his voice, but she kept her composure. "Hello," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Ms. Daniels, I wanted to personally apologize for the misunderstanding regarding the ramp." Richard began, his voice tight, as if rehearsed. "We realize now that our actions were unfair, and we are prepared to move forward with the installation of the ramp once more. I assure you, we're committed to resolving this situation." The wife's eyebrow raised. "Is that so?" she replied, trying to sound disinterested. "Well, I appreciate the apology, but it's not enough. We need more than just words. I want a full review of your policies, starting with the accessibility guidelines. This needs to be addressed across the board." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Richard spoke again, his voice was strained. "We'll certainly review the policies, but as I mentioned before, we still have rules that must be followed. I'm hoping we can come to an agreement without involving further actions." The wife smiled thinly. "Oh, we'll come to an agreement, Richard. But it's going to be on our terms, not yours." She hung up before he could say another word. She turned to her sister, who had been silently watching the exchange. "I think we've got their attention," she said, a grin spreading across her face. Her sister's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "That's just the beginning," she replied, her voice smooth and controlled. "But don't get too comfortable. We're only getting started." As the days passed, the wife couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building. They had struck a small victory, but her sister was already working behind the scenes, using her position to dig deeper into the HOA's operations. The wife had no idea just how far-reaching her sister's influence could go, but she knew that they were about to uncover things that would shake the very foundation of the HOA's control over the neighborhood. It wasn't just about getting the ramp fixed anymore. It was about exposing the corruption that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. And as the wife watched her sister prepare for the next phase of their plan, she realized that they weren't just fighting for their right to have a wheelchair ramp. They were fighting for justice, for fairness, and for the entire community that had been under the thumb of the HOA's oppressive rules. "I'm ready," the wife said one evening, looking her sister in the eye. "Whatever comes next, I'm with you." Her sister nodded, her gaze steady and sure. "Good," she said. "Because what we're about to do is going to change everything. And the HOA won't know what hit them." As they sat there, the wife realized that this wasn't just a fight for her sister. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been silenced by the HOA's rules. The battle was far from over, but the wife knew they were ready for whatever came next. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation as they moved forward, knowing that they were about to take the fight to the HOA on their own terms. The days following the phone call with Richard Allen felt like a slow burn. The wife could feel the tension building in the air, as if everyone in the neighborhood was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The wife had hoped that the HOA's apology would end the conflict, but it was clear that this was far from over. Her sister, always calm, had already begun to take steps to ensure that the HOA couldn't just sweep this under the rug. She wasn't just about fixing the ramp. This was about power, and her sister was ready to use hers. The wife knew her sister well. She was sharp, strategic, and careful. But today, something in the air was different. The calmness that had always surrounded her sister was now laced with a sharp edge. The time for subtlety was over. As the wife sat across from her sister in their living room, she could see the determination in her eyes. "We're not waiting any longer," her sister said firmly, pushing a stack of documents across the table. "I've got everything we need to go public." The wife hesitated for a moment, glancing at the papers, but her sister continued before she could ask any questions. "This is bigger than just the ramp. We've uncovered enough to know that the HOA is more than just an organization that enforces rules. They've been misusing their power, and it's time the community knew about it." The wife nodded, her stomach tightening with anticipation. She had never imagined it would get this far. "What exactly are we doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her sister leaned forward, her eyes locked on hers. "We're taking this straight to the media. I've already contacted a few local news stations. We're going public with the truth. The HOA won't just lose our trust. They'll lose the support of the entire neighborhood." The wife's heart skipped a beat. Going public meant taking the fight to a whole new level. It wasn't just about winning against the HOA anymore. It was about exposing them for what they were. But the wife couldn't shake the fear of how things might escalate. "Are you sure this is the right way to go?" she asked, trying to mask her own fear. "What if it gets worse? What if the HOA retaliates?" Her sister's expression softened for a moment, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "They've already retaliated. They've made it clear that they don't care about fairness, about what's right. Now, they're going to have to face the consequences of their actions. This is the only way to make them listen." As her sister spoke, the wife couldn't help but admire her strength. But she also realized that once they went down this path, there would be no turning back. The media would get involved, and their fight would become the talk of the entire community. It was a risky move, but one her sister was ready to take. "Okay," the wife said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." The next day, the sister met with the reporters. Her plan was simple yet effective: expose the HOA's misuse of power, their illegal practices, and the impact it had on the neighborhood. As the cameras rolled and the reporters asked questions, the sister's calm and powerful presence made an impression. Her words were deliberate, her tone unwavering. "This isn't just about a wheelchair ramp," she explained to the cameras. "It's about fairness. It's about transparency. It's about holding people in positions of power accountable for their actions. The HOA has crossed a line, and now it's time to pay the price." As the interview aired, the wife could see the shift in the atmosphere around them. The neighborhood, which had been filled with whispers and uncertainty, was now buzzing with new energy. People were talking, and the truth was starting to come out. The wife couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for her sister. She was taking the fight to the HOA in a way no one had ever dared before. The next few days were a whirlwind. The phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, concerned residents, and even members of the local government. The wife couldn't believe the ripple effect their actions had caused. The HOA, once so confident in their authority, now found themselves on the defensive. The media coverage was relentless, and it wasn't just local stations picking up the story. Regional and even national outlets began to report on the HOA's abuse of power, and the pressure started to mount. The wife and her sister knew that the HOA was scrambling. They had underestimated the power of someone like her sister, and now they were paying the price. But despite the growing momentum, the wife couldn't help but wonder if the HOA would truly back down or if they would try to fight back even harder. "They're not going to take this lying down," the wife said one evening as they sat together, watching the news. Her sister nodded. "I know, but we've already won. The truth is out, and it's only a matter of time before they're forced to make changes." The wife felt a shiver of uncertainty, but she knew her sister was right. They had taken control of the situation. The HOA couldn't hide behind their rules anymore. The neighborhood was watching, and soon, they would have no choice but to respond. As the media storm continued, the wife felt the walls around the HOA closing in. The sister's plan was working, just as she had intended. The wife had no idea what the final outcome would be, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of a much larger battle. As the days passed, the pressure on the HOA continued to build. The media coverage of the story had taken on a life of its own. What had started as a small issue over a wheelchair ramp was now a full-blown scandal. Reports were running every day, covering the HOA's abuse of power, their unfair treatment of residents, and the shocking revelation that the sister, the governor, had the power to control their funding. The neighborhood was in an uproar. People who had been silent before were now speaking out. Even those who had been hesitant to get involved now felt empowered to stand up against the HOA. The wife couldn't believe the speed at which everything was happening. Her sister had turned the tables, using her political power not just to defend her family but to shine a light on the corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years. It was a surreal experience. One moment, they were being ignored by the HOA, and the next, they were at the center of a community-wide movement. One evening, as the wife and her sister sat at the kitchen table, discussing the latest developments, the phone rang. The wife picked it up, already expecting the same calls from reporters or angry HOA members. But this time, it was different. "Hello, this is Sarah Daniels," the wife answered. "Ms. Daniels," a man's voice replied. "This is Thomas Miller from the state's Financial Oversight Committee. I'm calling to discuss the recent reports regarding the HOA." The wife's heart skipped a beat. The Financial Oversight Committee? This was bigger than she had realized. "Yes?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've been reviewing the information surrounding the HOA's funding, and we've found some troubling discrepancies," Thomas Miller continued. "We need to discuss the next steps and how we can move forward." The wife glanced at her sister, who had become suddenly alert. "Discrepancies?" the wife asked, her mind racing. "What kind of discrepancies?" "We've uncovered evidence that the HOA has been misusing funds intended for community improvements," Thomas Miller explained. "It's worse than we thought. The funds have been diverted to private accounts and used for purposes other than what they were intended for. The situation is more serious than just the ramp." The wife was stunned. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means the HOA has been breaking the law," Thomas Miller replied. "And we'll be launching an official investigation. We'll need your cooperation to move forward." The wife looked at her sister, who was now sitting upright in her chair, her expression hardening. "You've got our cooperation," her sister said calmly, though her eyes were filled with determination. "I've been waiting for this moment." As the conversation continued, the wife could feel the weight of the situation sinking in. The HOA had been stealing from the community, mismanaging funds, and hiding the truth from everyone. What they had thought was a simple fight over a ramp was now part of a much larger problem. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The HOA, once a dominant force in the neighborhood, was now on the defensive. The wife felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with a tinge of fear. She had seen her sister navigate difficult situations before, but this was something else entirely. They weren't just dealing with petty rules and regulations anymore. They were exposing corruption that went all the way to the top. The wife knew that this fight was going to get even more intense. "We'll make sure they pay for this," her sister said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "They've abused their power for too long." The wife nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. "What now?" she asked. "Now, we take action," her sister replied, her voice firm. "I'm going to make sure this doesn't go unnoticed. The public will know what they've been doing, and they'll be forced to answer for it." The next few days were a whirlwind. The investigation into the HOA's financial mismanagement was officially launched, and the media coverage exploded. Local news stations began airing updates, and more reporters gathered to cover the story. People from all over the state began to take an interest in the corruption within the HOA. The wife and her sister worked closely with the oversight committee, providing evidence and making sure the investigation was thorough. As the investigation unfolded, more details came to light. Shocking revelations about how the HOA had been funneling money into private accounts, using it for their personal gain. The community, once divided by the HOA's oppressive rules, was now united in outrage. They had been deceived for years, and now they were ready to fight back. The wife could feel the shift in the air. It was no longer just about their family's ramp. It was about justice for everyone who had been wronged by the HOA. The power had truly shifted, and the HOA was starting to realize that their grip on the neighborhood was slipping. The sisters' influence, her strategic moves, and the growing support from the community were turning the tide in their favor. The wife could see the fear in the faces of the HOA members as the investigation continued. The power they had once wielded so effortlessly was now crumbling. And the wife knew that this was only the beginning. The HOA would be held accountable for their actions, and no one in the community would ever let them forget it. The investigation into the HOA's financial misconduct continued to gain momentum, and the public response was nothing short of overwhelming. The wife and her sister were no longer the only ones speaking out. The entire community had rallied behind them, and the HOA was quickly realizing that they had underestimated the power of the people. News outlets from across the state and even nationally began picking up the story, and the HOA's reputation was quickly spiraling downwards. Every time the wife turned on the television or opened the newspaper, the HOA's name was being dragged through the mud. The pressure was mounting, and the HOA had no choice but to take action. But as much as the HOA tried to make it look like they were taking responsibility, the wife knew it was all just a show. They were only reacting to the damage that had already been done. The wife could feel the change in the air. People who had once been hesitant to speak out against the HOA were now calling them out openly. Neighbors who had kept to themselves were showing up at public meetings, demanding answers and accountability. It was a powerful sight, and the wife could see the fear in the eyes of the HOA members as their control over the neighborhood slipped away. "They don't stand a chance anymore," the wife said one evening, looking at her sister as they sat together, watching the news coverage. "They've made too many enemies." Her sister smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was one of quiet satisfaction. "It's not over yet," she said. "We're not just going to make them apologize. We're going to make sure they're held accountable, and that they can't ever pull this kind of thing again." The wife nodded, knowing her sister wasn't going to stop until the HOA was completely dismantled. But there was still one more step to take. The wife had seen the media coverage, the growing support for their cause, but she knew the real showdown was still to come. The HOA was trying to save face, and they were preparing for one final attempt to keep their grip on the community. The meeting had been scheduled, a public hearing to discuss the future of the HOA's operations and policies. The wife and her sister were ready. As they walked into the large conference room, filled with residents, reporters, and HOA members, the tension was thick. The HOA had brought in their top lawyers, trying to spin the story in their favor, but the wife could already see the cracks in their armor. She knew this was their last stand, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. The room grew quiet as the meeting began, and Richard Allen, the HOA president, stood up to address the crowd. His face was tight, clearly uncomfortable under the pressure. "We are here today to discuss the future of the HOA and the recent allegations brought to light," he said, his voice shaky. "While we acknowledge that there have been mistakes, we want to assure the community that we are committed to making things right." The wife sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on him. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the way he shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Her sister, calm as ever, stood up and walked to the podium. The room went silent as she stepped up to the microphone. "I don't need to remind everyone here of the damage that's been done by the HOA's actions," her sister began, her voice steady and strong. "But let me make one thing clear. This is not just about a wheelchair ramp. This is about accountability, fairness, and justice." The room was hanging on her every word. "You've used your position of power to exploit this community, and now you're trying to pretend that an apology will fix everything. But it won't," she continued. "You don't get to decide what's fair anymore. The people are speaking, and we won't be silenced. The wife watched the HOA members squirm, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Her sister's words were cutting through the room, and for the first time, the HOA's facade of authority seemed weak and fragile. I've already taken steps to ensure that the HOA is held accountable for their actions. I've contacted state officials, and the Financial Oversight Committee is already investigating. This isn't just about a ramp. This is about transparency, about holding those in power responsible for their actions. The wife felt her heart race as her sister spoke, feeling the power shift in the room. This wasn't just a fight over a single issue. It was about exposing the corruption that had been hiding for far too long. And the HOA was running out of time. The HOA members looked at each other, their faces drained of color as they realized they couldn't escape the truth. Richard Allen stood up to speak, his voice cracking with fear. "We understand the gravity of the situation," he said, his words forced. "And we are committed to making changes. We will rebuild the ramp, and we will review our policies. We apologize for the distress caused to the Daniels family." But the wife could see through his words. The apology was hollow, and it wasn't enough to undo the damage they had caused. "It's too late for apologies," her sister said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The damage has been done, and it's time for change. You will be held accountable, and this community will no longer tolerate your oppressive behavior." The room erupted in applause. The residents were on their feet, cheering for the wife and her sister, rallying behind the truth they had uncovered. The HOA was no longer in control. The power had shifted. As the applause died down, the wife and her sister exchanged a look. They had won. The HOA's grip on the neighborhood had been broken, and the community was finally free to thrive. The wife felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she also knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't just about one ramp, it was about standing up for what was right, for fairness, for the people who had been silenced for too long. The sister turned to her and smiled. "We did it," she said. "Together." The wife smiled back, feeling a sense of pride swell in her chest. They had done it. The neighborhood would never be the same again, and neither would they. The aftermath of the meeting was electric. The community, once fractured and fearful of the HOA's power, was now united. Residents who had silently endured the HOA's rules were coming forward, voicing their support for the changes that had been set into motion. It was clear that the battle had been won, not just by the wife and her sister, but by every resident who had been unfairly treated by the HOA's tyranny. The wife and her sister spent the next few days meeting with residents, discussing their concerns, and reassuring them that their fight wasn't over yet. The HOA may have been exposed, but the road to true justice was still ahead. "This is only the beginning," her sister said one evening, as they sat together, reflecting on the victory. "We've won this battle, but there's a lot more work to do. The system is broken, and we need to make sure it never happens again." The wife nodded. She had been part of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. The fight for the wheelchair ramp had turned into a fight for the entire community's rights. And now, she was more committed than ever to seeing it through. The days following the public meeting were filled with a sense of change in the air. The HOA, now under scrutiny from all sides, was scrambling to save face. The wife and her sister, however, weren't interested in their apologies anymore. They were focused on real, lasting change. Together, they began working on a new set of guidelines, one that would protect residents from the kind of manipulation and overreach the HOA had put them through. They met with city officials, gathered support from other communities, and began drafting a proposal for a new community governance system, one that was transparent, fair, and accountable. The wife could see how passionate her sister was about the cause. Every conversation was filled with purpose. She wasn't just fighting for the right to have a wheelchair ramp anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been wronged by an organization with unchecked power. And the more the wife saw her sister work, the more she realized how far-reaching the impact of their fight had become. Meanwhile, the HOA, now facing both public backlash and the legal consequences of their actions, had begun to crumble. Their leaders resigned one by one, unable to handle the pressure. Richard Allen, the once confident president, was now a figure of scorn. He had tried to cover up the truth, but the community had seen through his lies. And now, the damage was irreversible. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood began to heal. The ramp was rebuilt, of course, but it wasn't just a symbol of victory for the wife and her sister. It became a symbol for the entire community. A reminder that standing up for what's right was worth the fight, no matter how long it took. The wife had never imagined that a simple act of standing up for her sister's needs would lead to something so much bigger. But now, as she watched the neighborhood slowly return to normal, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. They had taken on the system and won. And more than that, they had inspired others to do the same. "We've changed everything," the wife said one evening, standing beside her sister as they looked out at the neighborhood from the front porch. "This isn't just about one fight. It's about making sure no one has to go through what we went through again." Her sister smiled, a sense of calm settling over her. "Exactly. We've shown them that we're not just going to stand by and let them bully us. But more importantly, we've shown the neighborhood that they have a voice. They can speak up, and they can demand better." The wife smiled, feeling the weight of the journey lift off her shoulders. "What's next?" she asked. "Now we rebuild," her sister replied. "We start by making sure this never happens again, and then we build a stronger, more connected community. One where everyone is treated fairly, regardless of their situation." It was clear that the battle had been won, but the work was far from over. Together, the wife and her sister had started a movement, one that would continue to spread beyond the boundaries of their neighborhood. The fight for fairness, for justice, had only just begun. As they watched the sun set behind their house, the wife felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had done what seemed impossible. And now, they were ready to continue making a difference, one step at a time. The HOA's reign was over, and the community had taken back control. The future was bright, and the wife was ready to help her sister lead the way. The months that followed the battle with the HOA were filled with change. What had once been a neighborhood filled with tension and fear had transformed into a community of people who were empowered, united, and determined to make their voices heard. The wife couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride as she watched her sister, now fully engaged in leading the efforts to overhaul the HOA system, work tirelessly to ensure the future of the neighborhood would be free from corruption. Their victory over the HOA wasn't just about the wheelchair ramp anymore. It was about creating a fair and just environment where no one was left behind. The wife saw the small but significant shifts in how people interacted with each other. Neighbors, who had once avoided conversations with her, were now stopping by to chat, offering their support, and sharing their gratitude for the change that had come. The fear that once clouded the air had lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and belonging. But as much as things had changed for the better, the wife knew that the fight wasn't truly over. Her sister's hard work had begun to bear fruit, but it wasn't just about dismantling the old system. It was about building something new, something stronger, that would protect future generations from suffering the same fate. "We've come a long way," the wife said one evening, watching her sister at a community meeting, leading the discussion on new, fair guidelines for the neighborhood. "But I know you won't stop until every last piece of the old system is gone." Her sister looked at her, a smile of quiet satisfaction on her face. "You're right. It's not over, but we've set the foundation. The HOA won't be able to operate the same way again." The wife nodded, impressed by her sister's commitment. "I've learned so much through all of this," she admitted. "About standing up for what's right, about the power of community, and about how far someone is willing to go to make sure justice is done." Her sister smiled and placed a hand on hers. "We've both learned. And we've both contributed to this change. But the real lesson is that we have to keep fighting for what's fair, no matter how big or small the issue is." Over the next few weeks, the wheels of change kept turning. The new neighborhood guidelines were put into place, focusing on accessibility, transparency, and fairness. The HOA was no longer in control, and the residents had a stronger voice than ever before. With the support of the community, the wife and her sister helped establish a new leadership committee that would ensure accountability, keeping the power in the hands of the people. The wife could see the results of their hard work everywhere she looked. The neighborhood was thriving, the streets were filled with life, and the fear that had once held so many people back had been replaced by an overwhelming sense of pride. The wife's sister stood at the forefront, a leader who had not only reclaimed her own life and rights but had fought for the rights of everyone in the community. It wasn't just the ramp that had been rebuilt, it was the entire community's sense of power. As the months turned into a year, the wife saw how much her sister's leadership had changed not only their lives but the lives of everyone around them. The community was flourishing, with new programs for residents, better communication channels, and a shared commitment to inclusivity. The ramp, which had started all of this, was a reminder of where they had come from, a symbol of resilience, of fighting back against injustice, and of how one voice could change everything. The wife sat on her porch one evening, watching as children played on the street, their laughter filling the air. Her sister was standing beside her, looking out over the neighborhood they had helped rebuild. "We did it," the wife said quietly, her voice filled with contentment. "We really did." Her sister nodded, a proud smile on her face. "We didn't do it alone," she replied. "This community did it together. And that's what makes all of this so special." The wife leaned back, feeling the warmth of the moment. "What happens now?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Now we keep going," her sister said. "We keep making sure the community stays strong. We make sure no one ever feels like they're powerless again." And with that, the wife knew that their fight wasn't just a chapter in their lives. It was a lifelong commitment. They had changed the course of their community's future, and now they were part of something much bigger than they had ever imagined. The neighborhood was free, and it was thriving. Together, they had built a foundation that would last for generations, one where fairness, justice, and equality would always be the rule, not the exception. The wife smiled, knowing that this victory was just the beginning.